So in 1969, The Who's Tommy was meant to be the rock album to end all rock albums, the LP to end all LPs. I think it wanted to be the masterpiece of the rock genre, more or less. Something like the ultimate proof that rock music was a valid and meritable form of art and worth respect and study and adulation. The album is this great encapsulation of modern artistic expression. And yet it's very different from the three previous studio albums from The Who. First album was kind of a mod rock, fairly basic sort of album. Quick One was kind of psychedelic and, kind of groovy and, a lot of really interesting production on that album. Great release, a Quick One. The Who So Out was fantastic, phenomenal, almost Mothers-esque kind of, just very strange art pop, idiosyncratic. The Who So Out remains my favourite album in The Who's discography. So what happens when we get to Tommy? This grand, ambitious art rock experiment, this baroque pop opus, or so it wants to be, is it? It certainly became an initial standard, along with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, certainly, and eventually, very shortly afterward, I think, Led Zeppelin 4, and then Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon, is this example of the great rock album. And honestly, in a way, yeah, I agree. It is so grand and ambitious and crafted and manicured and just monumental. You have to admire the scope and the experience of Tommy. It's just, it's such a powerful release in many ways. Although, it's so contrived and it's so elaborate and it's such a fairly obvious and trite attempt at a great album. And you know what? For trying to elevate rock music into something that everyone could undeniably, inescapably respect, what it resorted to was trying to borrow tropes from classical music and musical theatre and libretto, to get rock music had to kind of turn into something else that it wasn't in order to get the respect of everyone else. It's like it just seemed kind of antithetical to rock music. It seemed like it was almost like a dismissal of rock music. It's like, we're a real music now, but we still use rock instruments, and rock music's moving on, but it's this rock music becoming kind of conservative in a respect, right? It's elaborate art rock, contrived and manicured and very polished and clean. It's interesting that everyone would come to consider, for the most part, I believe, 1971's Who's Next to be the Who's opus rather than Tommy. I think that says an awful lot about what doesn't work about Tommy, or at least what hesitates us from placing. Why do we place Who's Next over Tommy? Why is that? One of these two LPs feels like an organic expression. The other feels like this contrived attempt to follow rules and follow a set scaffold in order to compose a great album. I don't have to tell you which is which. Who's Next is beautiful and existential and a fantastic, vivid portrait of where a band were at in 1971. Well, the hippie movement's over. Tommy wasn't the Messiah. Woodstock happened, but where are we now? What do we do? What's left? What's the point of rock music at this stage? Who's Next is essentially the hangover of Tommy. And I find it I think a lot of people consider it one of the most interesting and exciting moments in the history of rock music. 1971, the same year as Zeppelin 4, and an album which I think, and many others would probably think, handily competes with the very mighty Led Zeppelin 4. But we're not talking about Who's Next, we're talking about Tommy. We're trying to analyse what the issue was with Tommy, and I think by thinking about why one prefers Who's Next, the answers become a lot clearer. Maybe in an alternate universe, the Lighthouse, a rock opera version of what ended up becoming Who's Next, is this extraordinary piece of work, the greatest thing you've ever heard, better than Tommy, better than Quadrophenia, or whatever. And in that world, I wonder if in that world Tommy comes across as... I don't know how it comes across. It still might come across, even in that world, as a weaker version of a great rock opera. Well, here's the thing. Here's the other thing. A lot of people prefer Quadrophenia to Tommy now as well. The concept of Quadrophenia feels so much more organic and realized. The songs kind of write themselves in a way where God, it feels like Tommy. It's like, well, we've got to fill up the album. There'll be a song here, and then you end up putting crap on the album like Sally Simpson. We'll get to that later. So Tommy just comes across as really lame and square compared to the next three Who albums. Who by Numbers is absolutely brilliant, and Tommy can't compare to the confessional, heartbreaking beauty of that release. No way. It's such a contrived story as well. It's like, oh, it's like Pete Townshend trying to go out of his way to make this encapsulative story, but it's so rote. The concept is really so hackneyed, honestly. There's a basis for an idea that he clearly wanted to explore, and then he appears to not trust his intuition, and he attempts to force something out of this concept. I suspect that if he organically went with the concept, it might not have amounted to much. Oh man, maybe Townshend had maybe it's an idea he came up with at the end of an LSD trip, and it was the happiest moment of his life. And then weeks later, he was feeling less enthused about the idea kind of organically. Maybe he was thinking of a few songs around it, or maybe one LP, one disc LP, not a double album of this concept. But then he was like, no. I need to keep that moment alive. I can't, I need to keep. It's like he became religious about that moment of euphoria and felt, no, I should make it a double album, and it becomes this contrived piece of shooty work effort rather than the kind of organic, hormonal, just shameless expression that was rock and roll. Who's Next reflects this a heck of a lot more. Quadrophenia, even still a rock opera, reflects this a hell of a lot more than Tommy. It's unfortunate. It is what it is. The more music you listen to, the more albums you listen to, the less one appreciates Tommy in the grand scheme of things. In its context, in its time, as an initial experiment of a example of what can be. It's an album that makes. I'll put it like this. When I first listened to this album, I'll put it like this. When I was first listening to this album, I was floored. I was like, wow. Not just at how powerful the album was, but just at the idea that, wow, these critically acclaimed albums really do have something to them. And there's quite a few critically acclaimed albums I still need to listen to. So there was and Tommy's one of the first ones you listen to in many respects, I believe. The Who was just a kind of a formative band for a lot of people getting into older classic rock music, and Tommy's one of the more acclaimed and popularly acclaimed albums of all time. It's easy to get a hold of, online or otherwise. And so you're so very excited. Oh wow, I can't wait to listen to all these other great albums. When you're listening to Tommy, by the time Tommy's finished and the days go by, you're thinking, yeah, it wasn't perfect. It was kind of contrived and rote and just kind of tacky and square a little bit, especially when you get into Who's Next. And I was already familiar with the Who Sell Out at that time, and I in my memory I was like, well, I ultimately prefer Sell Out. Getting into Quadrophenia, I preferred that, and so Tommy diminished in my mind over time. I'll listen to it again now. Let's go through the track list. We'll see how it holds up. Okay, few points I want to mention outright just before we delve into the album in general. I find it interesting that Tommy, it isn't prog, and it didn't necessarily set a template for progressive rock. Why? Because the music itself isn't necessarily virtuosic or based upon suites or a kind of a understanding of music theory and a desire to do something pseudo-classical or pseudo-jazz or pseudo-medieval, if you're a gentle giant, or Renaissance, in the context of rock music. That's not what's going on here. You're having extended solos and but solos of a rock variety. They're all chunks of extended, more epic rock songs placed together to compose these sort of suites. The Overture and the Underture are a series of riffs and with Moon's powerful drumming going underneath it, and Entwistle's bass keeping it together. and just a series of production strings and Townshend strumming or plucking. It isn't prog in the sense that we understand ELP, Yes, Genesis, King Crimson, Pink Floyd to be prog. It's closer to art rock. It's 60s rock, parts of 60s rock songs, which instead of being in little ditties, well, there are several of Tommy, of course, but for the longer tracks, they'll play segments, and it's not about, key changes and time signatures. It's about just placing all these together to create an epic, long series of moods, more or less, not a continuing symphony. So in this respect, it doesn't leave rock music too far behind, as, say, one could argue Tarkus or, Fragile or whatever, Octopus by Gentle Giant might. Although it is interesting how, rather than compose a new genre or new subgenres in the Court of the Crimson King, ELP, Fragile, Onward do, there's this insistence that, oh no, this is, rock music, and rock music ought to be a libretto as well. So that's kind of just off-putting about the experience of Tommy. I'd prefer it if it was just a new genre entirely, like the prog rock. It's the prog rock thing is almost less pretentious to me. It's like, okay, we're doing a different thing. Rock music can be its own thing, but Tommy and the Who are insisting, no, rock music can be this as well. And it's just like, well, not a new thing, just it needs to be this, it's better as this. Why is it? God, there's a lot of annoying musical Andrew Lloyd Webber-esque silliness on this album. Man, 60% good, 40% just kind of bad. Oh, man. When you're really just listening to it and not trying to feel anything necessarily, but, earnestly wanting to like it, as much as I earnestly want to like anything I'm listening to, because, I'm listening to it and I don't want to waste my time. So I try to like anything I enjoy. I imagine everyone else ought to have that principle as well. Just it's like, oh, I can't wait to not like this album that's got good reviews on Rate Your Music. It's just like, if that's your attitude, just stop things. But yeah, the annoying musical Andrew Lloyd Webber silliness, it really, 40% of this album is bad-ish. 60% is fantastic though, like really just sublime, honestly, like really fucking good. Pinball Wizard is so good, I suspect it was the first song composed for the album. Let me know what was actually the case, but I know I have heard they sold the manager on the idea of Tommy via it being a pinball-oriented concert. I think Pete Townshend said, he can communicate and learns how to interact with the world via pinball. And I believe we're talking about Kit Lambert here, would have been like, beauty, let's do it then. And so they're like, well, how do we start? Let's write a song about, let's write Pinball Wizard. And so they wrote Pinball Wizard, and they had to write an album around it. That's the problem with Tommy. There's so many forced songs. It's like, right, we just got to fill this concept with songs now, I guess. Then you get garbage like Sally Simpson. A song like Welcome, which has very interesting parts, and it's interspersed with this didactic kind of crap where it's like a very obvious novel that's trying to be a symbol of the times, as Tommy absolutely is. Come into my house, freedom. Oh, wait, no, it's not working out. We've got to build a holiday camp. Oh, wait, human nature. It's not working out. Oh, the 60s aren't working out. It's not the Messiah like we thought it was. Oh, wow. How astute, guys. How astute. But it's interspersed with these fantastic musical segments, these great instrumental breaks. When Tommy's good, there's powerful Keith Moon drumming. Roger Daltrey's at some... If Pete Townshend came across as a bit of a fool from Tommy, Roger Daltrey just came across as possibly the finest rock singer alive. So it was all a win for Daltrey, I guess. No matter what the quality of the album's music or lyrics were, libretto. Ugh. Daltrey came out great. He even got the star in the film and made a little movie career for himself while he was, Oh, just while we're here, I love Ken Russell, but I'm actually not the biggest fan of the Tommy film. I can appreciate it for what it is, but I guess I just don't like I like the album. I don't love the album enough to appreciate the film. Say that, right? The track list goes as such. Overture, very strong. It's a Boy, just one of these minute ditties. The way Tommy so desperately tried to make itself a story at the expense of being good music just sucks. 1921. See, early on in Disc 1 and Tommy, it's kind of working. I had no reason to be over optimistic, but something in your smile could change bad weather. But then it's, you didn't see it, you didn't hear it, you didn't hear it. Well, that's not an organic melody. That's just some bullshit you've put in there to fucking make it cohere as a piece, just out of some tacky bullshit obligation. Ugh. Amazing Journey, Sparks, The Hawker. That section's great. Keith Moon's drumming in Amazing Journey is a coming of age moment. Christmas is corny. I had a friend who had their first DMT trip to this song, actually, so it's got some like sentimental value. I was sitting next to them, it's kind of cool, but like, you know, whatever. There's better songs to have your first DMT trip to, like Genesis' The Musical Box. Cousin Kevin. Again, these songs are just stories. You don't need them. They're crap. The Acid Queen's a bit better. That could, like, if you heard The Acid Queen is just like a Who single, you'd think it was not bad. Underture. The Underture is really good, somewhat, but it's also really long. This is almost as impressive as the Who ever get as instrumentalists. John Entwistle's on fire on this track, and the production on here, quite soaring. Kid Lambert, good job here. Not quite. I mean, it's very elaborate and it's very airy, and it's not like tight. It's not a tight production. It's kind of just this big annoying wall of sound. I don't know if that's the proper term here. I'm not a producer, obviously. Yeah, let's move on. Oh no. So, do you think it's alright, Fiddle About? Don't put this crap on here. I don't know what they would think. They thought it'd be deep. Oh, it needs to be said. No. It's just that there are some... I don't want to hear it. No one wants to hear it. It's not even effective artistically. If anything, you're making light of tragic, ugly events in the world. No, just don't do it. The Pinball Wizard, as I said, one of the Who's best songs, one of the best songs of the era. There's Doctor. Go to the mirror. Listening to you, I feel the music gazing at you. I sometimes wonder if Townshend really believed in this concept because he thought of that melody and his lyrics, and he was like, yes, this concept works. In those segments, it's actually kind of working. I'll agree with him. Tommy, can you hear me? It's the most annoying shit in the world. Smash the mirror. I'm a sensation. Extra, extra, read all about it. Pinball Wizard and a miracle cure. I hate Sally Simpson. I'm free, do 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 do. I'm free. Sorry, Roger, that was a butchering of your beautiful voice. Welcome. I was talking about that earlier. Tommy's Holiday Camp. Let's have no Uncle Ernie on this album. We're not gonna take it. Do 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 do. It's okay, but like it's just a reprise of that really nice and a better version of, mind you, the listening to you, I feel the music. It's hard not to feel moved by this point. But yeah, what a mixed experience. What there's some garbage on here, and yet there's some immaculate beauty. A mixed bag, but mostly wonderful, to be honest. Mostly. Oh man. It can be a bit of a wince at times, you know. But that's the listening experience of Tommy, like, I guess. To fly the flag of Tommy is a strange thing. Tommy established, like, this implication that rock albums needed to reach a certain level of greatness, and then we could put them on the shelf and say, right, that's the great canon of rock albums. And once we couldn't be bothered listening to music anymore in the 80s, or opening our minds a little bit more, we decided that all the good rock albums came out, all the good albums of the history of music came out between, like, not even the 50s, 65 to, like, 74 or whatever, 67 to 74, whatever they say it is. And then afterwards, everything's just bad or whatever. Well, not, they might extend to the later 70s and some of the early mid-80s, but... And then it just becomes this boomer moment of, oh, let's just listen to the great albums that came out between, like, 65 and, like, 87 or whatever, over and over again. And albums need to... It's like you can't just enjoy an album as an original expression of music. It's got to follow these rules of being a great album. And so as a result, only like these hackneyed, contrived, nostalgia acts are gonna, you know, give you any grab your attention at all. Tommy is the beginning and the encapsulation of boomer conservatism in a way. I mean, in a cultural, not necessarily in a policy sense, a political position sense, but more in a oh, you know, stop trying to look for new things. Just stick to, just get a house and some records and some food and a beer belly. It's all you need. That sort of like, and the boomers used to be, who changed the world, utopia, age of Aquarius, to, dad bods, right? Tommy encapsulates that. I feel like an appreciation of Tommy, it's like, you'd think that generation would the ideals of that generation, the principles of that generation, they eventually go, this isn't radical enough. This is such a backwards kind of, attempt at doing something contrived and rote and like elaborate kind of materialist architecture in a way. It's not pure, it's not organic, it's not real, it's not authentic. But of course, we've long established that the baby boomers were, less interested in countercultural or revolutionary ideals and more interested in, music that was just good music. I mean, it was good music. It was just also, I think it was just a bit more interesting than being catchy, And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you have to overthrow the United States government and install, a people's commissar or anything, but, just, do some things to prevent the GFC from happening, Thanks, guys. Thanks, Flower Power. That generation ended up being a massive joke, and I sometimes find myself one of the few people of my generation. I don't even know. I'm born in 1996. I don't know what I am. No one knows what I am. I defend the baby boom era for bringing us people like Peter Singer and Alvy Ray Smith, Monty Hellman. I think he's a bit earlier. Yeah, Monty Hellman, why not? Well, what a generation of filmmakers and artists. Environmentalism and animal rights were non-existent prior to the 1960s and in the popular zeitgeist. We have a lot to thank that generation for, and we also have a lot to, kind of scorn them for. Well, scorn them for while they accuse us of being lazy. I never, it's like that generation had like, just jobs just lined up for them. And they it's just like, they ought to be financing our like desolate, lack of opportunities for the rest of their lives. And their wills ought to be made out as just like this big apology letter for us not being able to, make any future for ourselves, because they was like, we're going to be so much richer than our kids, and just screwed us. It's like, we all want to retire on the coast. It's like, here's the thing, like, retiring in luxury wasn't a thing before your fucking generation. Constantly renovate your houses, and so no one can fucking afford them except venture capitalists. It's a pretty nice album overall. I would say I'm a fan if I had to. If you're asking if I am a fan of Tommy or if I'm not a fan of Tommy, I am a fan of it, I would say.